Ya Allah, Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah. This is, inshallah, now finally getting to the end of, you could say, the business end of our presentation. Inshallah, I'm just going to try to cover it really quickly, but for those that haven't been updated yet, I don't know if you guys are aware, some of my students have actually been doing this as a paper indirectly with Sheikh Hanwa, with the International Open University as part of the Islamic Studies program. So it's going to be quite loaded. Some of the things are going to be completely new to you, despite the fact that we've covered the basics of Wahy in page 6 and 7 of the book. But inshallah, I'm hoping to do the same with you guys. But what we're going to do is maybe add a little bit more to it so you can actually find it, let's just say, a bit more interesting. Anyways, we'll just go to the next page, inshallah. I don't know if I can flip it. Anyways, oh yeah, we'll go to the next page, brother, as well. Yeah, so here, yeah, that's basically it. So just a brief thing about it. Alhamdulillah, you know, don't freak out if you haven't seen it over here. I just have to make special mention here to obviously Professor Dr. Anwar Sahib. Mashallah, he had some really good input from, you could say, the historical side of things and talking about the compilation of Qura'at. Obviously, you have to include people that are either the Inuit Isnad directly and indirectly. Inshallah, definitely there's Sheikh Amir, who's currently running the national, you can say, Ijaza program, and he's the head muqri with regards to this. For these people, yes, that aren't aware, and might come as a news to them, he's also the head of the ulama board. Reason being is that he's got a qualification in Sharia, so he's done a 4-year degree. He also, mashallah, has done one in Qur'at as well in Saudi Arabia, just to clarify. There's Sheikh Muhammad Yahya, who's my immediate Sheikh in the Isnad. And there's Sheikh Muhammad Salim as well, mashallah. He's completed Qura'at al-Kubra over in Egypt, and he's my current teacher at this stage. So just to kind of illustrate to people, I have an Isnad as it stands in recitation of Hafs, and I'm completing one with Asim. Despite this, what you're about to witness today is specifically not relating to me directly being a subject matter expert. This is going to be crazy because some of you guys are saying, look, I'm doing this as a postgrad level. But I'm trying to say is like, if this is overwhelming for you, then you can imagine what it's like doing a degree in Qur'at with multiple ijazat, let alone a master's and a PhD. So inshallah, I hope to kind of illustrate that to you guys by the end of this presentation. Inshallah, we'll go to the next slide, which is equally important. Yeah, and as you probably figured out, special thanks to my wife for giving me the time to actually take off and do this type of work, be it the study or getting, the phone calls with regards to doing the qira'at, the practical side of this program, or even, just doing this, mashallah, lecture series we've done for the past 22 weeks. So jazakumullah khair. So just letting those people know that haven't jumped on the discussion at the moment, and this is completely new to you. This is a presentation. Yes, it will have a slideshow. That's what I'm actually presenting to you guys. That's what you can see. What you're not aware is actually happening in the background. This is actually a class reading. So we call it a sharh structure format. What this basically means is the student or even the teacher, they read the book or they recite it. What happens is that somebody like myself running the program, I'll interject where needed. I'll explain specific key concepts where I see students, say, for example, make mistakes or struggle with. In addition to that, it's meant to be interactive. So mashallah, we take breaks, the students talk back to you, and we have an interactive discussion explaining key concepts. This is how it's been, mashallah, done traditionally for hundreds of years. Muhaddithin do the same as well. And that's how they even pass isnad, and people do ijazat and hadith also, because they sit down, they transmit not just the knowledge and the actual text, but also the explanation of it. And mashallah, for those that are completely new to this, what I'm running at the moment, or we're about to complete, inshallah, in the course of the 20 or so weeks, is a teach the teachers program. Just because you've done an ijazah, and I've been told this by myself, my Sheikh Muhammad Yahya, who I mentioned earlier in the slide, specifically said to me and to my host organization, tell your teachers or the host organization and start teaching. And I basically am passing this to you directly to my Sheikh, who's currently alive, and as your teacher for the people I actually teach
Can't hear you, Brother Ibrahim. So sorry, brother. I got disconnected.
I've heard a little bit. You're talking about like the compilation and how they're written and how they changed over
The
time.
compilation is part of it. The reason why we're covering. Oh, assalamu alaikum. I see, brother. As back. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah. So the compilation of the Quran is part of what we're doing. But to understand the writing, obviously, I'm giving a brief background on the compilation so they understand how it interacts with the script. What I'm going to be talking about, and the book talks about today, as you can see, it just strictly looks at the script from a script perspective. You see what I mean?
Yep.
So I'd asked this question because it actually got raised in the sign up forms. Now I'm going to open the floor up to everybody before I start. So it's probably sounds like it's got nothing to do with Qur'an because people are going to say, what's the point of what we're doing? We're looking at archaeological evidence. This is good for a history museum, not for Qur'at or for whatever I'm doing at the moment. I'm going to ask a straight up question. Fiqh related matters. Does anybody know how you could, how does this ties in with wudu? The way that you recite Quran and preserve it. From a fiqh matter, what happens when you do your wudu or your washing before you go to salah? Okay, I'll ask you another question now. This is probably more direct. Supposedly, you give an oath, like say Wallahi, and giving an oath in Islam, what you have to do is pay compensation, or let's just say kafara, technical definition. If you swear by Allah to do something, and then let's just say you refuse to do it, you can't fulfill the oath. So you've got certain requirements, like feeding a person or fasting how many days. Now I'll ask you guys a direct question. We know that there's a kafara or something you have to kind of do in order to actually ask Allah for forgiveness for the sin that you made, which is not fulfilling your oath or vows. The question I ask the audience right now, and I'm showing how this ties in with the science that we're doing, what is the ruling if somebody comes up and says, let's just say, Wallahi, I'm not going to eat this. But if somebody turns up and says, Wallahi, 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 I'm not eating this. If the kafara is just to say has to be done over 10 days, how many days for a single, a halif, as we say, how many days has this person fast if he said Wallahi 3 times? And how does this tie to what we're teaching today? I open the floor for everybody now. Have you been in that situation?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam, bro. Yeah, feel free to give us your opinion, man.
I just tuned in not long ago, but for the kafara, it's you fast 3 days. If
Yeah,
you
but what I'm trying to say is, if I said, well, like I gave you this realistic example,
مغلظ.
Wallahi, Wallahi, Wallahi. Yeah. So you're still saying it's 3 days?
You mean like a yamin مغلظ?
Yes, because I'm repeating it.
Allahu a'lam, I'm not sure. I'm guessing it's 3 days still, but I'm not sure.
So you're saying it's 3 days. Anybody else has a different opinion?
Obviously, I can't just make a stab in the dark.
I know what you mean. I understand what you're trying to say, but I'm trying to see if there's different opinions. Anybody say it's 9 days because he said it 3 times? Okay. Now the question is, what's your evidence for what you just put forward? It's a pretty tough one, right? Because we can't do things without having evidence.
Yeah, you're right.
So now, I'm going to show you how this ties in with the recitation. I'll get you to look at the slide over here. So here, specifically, this is one of the oldest manuscripts, as you can see. This is specifically designed, my limited understanding of the. Let's talk about actually Arabic in particular. So the origins of the Quranic script, what we're looking at right now is known as the Hijazi font. Hijaz, as you know, is a specific area in the Middle East that relates to the eastern part of Saudi Arabia facing the ocean. This is basically an example of an old Quranic manuscript. This was actually derived from. Sorry, Jazakallah khair, bro. Shows how bad I multitask. The western part, we're talking, Jeddah and its surroundings, Jazakallah khair, bro. So that's on the western part. If we can go back to the lecture slide a bit further, the one with the table, just go back a bit, brother Saab. Oh, it's a bit difficult. Basically, at the moment, it's derived from the Nabati font. So here, the Nabati font is probably the closest that you can personally see to the Arabic font. There were a lot of old Semitic languages that popped around at that time. By Semitic, I mean, you've got Aramaic, you've got Syriac. They used similar composite letters. You can find these in old archaeological, let's just say, carvings, for lack of a better word. But the first instance that we talk about, this is the one that you're looking at, especially in the right-hand corner, and you're probably seeing it in a lot, especially with the old school, videos. That is the Hijazi font. So just for everybody's perspective, when you look at the Hijazi font, you don't see any harakat, any accents or dots. There wasn't any dotting of the letters. This is pre the dotting era. So anybody's familiar with that? They're like, I'm just trying to catch up, make sure everybody's on the same level. So original Arabic didn't contain any dots or anything to help the reciter, other than the fact that they already had that in their heads because they were native Arabs. So this is all, no questions about that part, right?
No.
Alhamdulillah. So now let's start with the interesting stuff. So at the time of writing a wahi, as happened to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he would receive the revelation. I'm not going to go into the details from Sayyidina Jibreel. Basically, when it was passed down, one of the kutab, it was written by the kutab immediately. One of the most famous kutab, as we know, is Sahabi, mashallah, by the name of Zayd ibn Thabit. According to his account, he said, I used to write down the revelation in the presence of the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him. And he would dictate to me, as in he'll say it word by word, letter by letter, clearly. When I finished, he would say, read it back. So subhanAllah, he didn't just let them write it down. He said, read it back to me so he can double check he said it correctly. So I would read it, and there was any mistake, he would correct it. And then once it's done, of course, he'll say, take it out to the people. So even though it was, again, they memorized the wahi, Rasul himself made sure that it was written down and transmitted correctly in written form. Next slide. So now the Qura''s contribution. Qura' here is referring to the reciters, or the people that actually, mashallah, it was two things that had to happen. It wasn't just written down, but it was also the wahi. So we had to actually, it was an orally transmitted tradition, and it was physically written down to preserve it. These things went together. Nothing was skipped. Now, from the Qura' contribution, it was said that Zayd ibn Thabit even had fully equipped writing stations with inkwells on standby, ready and upon request. So mashallah, so the Sahabi himself imagined that, like in his house, he already had a kit on standby. As soon as the wahi came, he'd come and receive it fresh as is, mashallah, and ink it. The level of care by Rasul Sallallahu ensuring that the wahi is presented in combination of Zayd's excellent attentiveness to dictation and spell checking would be the perfect training for this young Sahabi who would have a huge role to play in the Quran preservation for decades to come. His name is going to come later. That's why we're mentioning him. It wasn't just him that wrote the Wahi, but it was also other Sahaba as well that actually wrote down the Quran as was revealed. These manuscripts were spell checked by the Kuttab, or the scribes, in the presence of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And this would be a critical part. So not only did they write the Wahi, they had to verbally read it back to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He would check that they wrote it down correctly, and then he'll give them permission to go. So the Quran during the entire life of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam not only was recited and the Sahaba learned it from other Sahabis and was verbally checked, but was also checked in writing. That is a huge role that these people did in order to preserve the Quran. Next page. Now we're here now at the time of Sayyidina Abu Bakr. Now we're talking 10 years after Hijrah. This is 632 Common Era. The Quran was both memorized and written down during the time of the Prophet. And as we already know, this involved basically anything they could find. We're talking leather parchments. We're talking bones, especially big shoulder blades from camels. That was used as well. There was use of palm leaf fronds, skins specifically, and even flat stones that resembled tablets. Anything along those lines worked as writing surfaces. So these were the earliest manuscripts that we have, or that the Quran was written on at that time. Era of Abu Bakr. Okay, so this is the interesting part. I'd ask everybody, what was the biggest achievement of Abu Bakr's era with regards to Quran compilation? From memory.
Is it that he compiled all of those writings into one book, Kitab al-Umm?
Yes, and this was done immediately after
the Battle of Yamama?
Yes, Jazakallah khair. So basically, for those that haven't been clued up about Battle of Yamama, the Quran was a memorized tradition. After the Battle of Yamama, a significant amount of casualties. The Hufaz, mashallah, to this day have a reputation for standing their ground and being called upon. Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abbas al-Muttalib, the uncle of Rasul was said that he screamed out in the middle of the battle, Ya Ashab Surah al-Baqarah, basically said, all people of Surah al-Baqarah, the ones that memorized in the Quran. Obviously from the Sahaba that have gathered, most of them, basically all of them basically came to his aid, especially from the Quran or the Quran memorizers. As a result, a lot of them perished in that battle. And this really caused a lot of people to get worried about the status of the Quran, specifically Sayyidina Umar, who actually approached Abu Bakr with regards to the proposal. He said, how could I do something that wasn't done at the time of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? And they kept discussing it backwards and forwards until the idea, mashallah, came into their mind. And that's when they brought Zayd ibn Thabit. So Zayd ibn Thabit, mashallah, managed to sit down. He compiled all these loose items into one, let's just say, huge document, or the Kitab al-Umm. And from that, basically, you had to bring these specific pieces that were written and witnessed by Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and not just bring somebody there, bring two witnesses to say that this was written at the time of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And mashallah, when you think of it, all of them memorized the Quran, Zayd ibn Thabit and a lot of these Sahaba included. But they decided that wasn't enough. So there was a consensus by the Ummah at that time, by all the Sahaba, that what was being passed down was the physical archaeological evidence in addition to the oral tradition. And that was what has been written down in the big document, the Kitab al-Umm, and it got compiled in that Hijazi font. Now, we're going to inshallah shift to the era of Sayyidina Uthman. Anybody has an idea about the biggest contribution Sayyidina Uthman put forward? You might have heard something.
Well, he ordered a committee of the Qurra, of the Huffaz, of the
Yes.
Wahi writers, I think, to be headed by, is it Thabit ibn Zayd radiallahu anhu?
Well, this one it wasn't specifically headed by Zayd ibn Thabit, but he was part of the four-man committee that was there. So yes, he was involved as well. But yeah, keep going.
And I think it happens after, maybe I can't remember the somewhere in Asia, I think. Maybe ما بعد النهرين, after the two rivers area, and he said to Sayyidina
Yes.
Uthman that the people there, he was horrified how Quran was obviously not read properly, or
Yeah, that's mashallah basically the gist of the story. Yeah, so basically at the time of Sayyidina Uthman, mashallah, you could see the Quran spread past the Arabic Peninsula. So it was Sayyidina Hudayfa ibn Yaman specifically. He
Huzaifa.
was he was there at the conquest of Armenia, specifically around that part, as you said, Armenia and other Azerbaijan today, as is known. And people started arguing about each other's recitations. And when I say people, it was actually armies, because they were there doing engage in conflict. And subhanAllah, when they started arguing, obviously they're carrying weapons, obviously it can be quite heated. So he ran back to mashallah Sayyidina Uthman and said, I can't really, the translation basically says like, come and attend to this issue before everyone splits up like the Jews and the Christians did, because this was a very serious matter. So they took it very seriously. As a result, Sayyidina Uthman came, and as you know, the Islam was spreading. Obviously, the Masahif have been spreading around, and everyone's trying to make their own copy in order to actually make sure that it spreads to their part of the world. The problem is the recitation correct? So what Sayyidina Uthman did is he standardized the spelling of the words to facilitate ease of pronunciation, because now the script that we said was a Hijazi script, which was, as I was corrected, in the western part of Arabia, or the Hijaz area. This font was region specific, and it was maybe read by people in the Arabian Peninsula. Islam now has gone past Jazirat al-Arab, or let's just say the Arab Peninsula. Now we need to actually make sure that we have a standardized script by which people can identify the letters clearly, as opposed to assume they know what it is. Inshallah, we'll go to the next page. So basically, the era of Sayyidina Uthman, what he did basically, he's made 5 to 7 copies. Scholars still disagree on the actual number, but what they agree on is they were written in that unified script that he made. He invited the Kibar, obviously Sahaba and the Qur'an and the Kutab that were available at that time. And they specifically catered it, so taking into account the local dialect as well, because as we know, there is different, you could say, there are acceptable recitations of the Quran, and there is completely just made up words. So in order to accommodate for all the types of possible recitations or riwayat, he made sure that the script took that into account, as well as standardize it so that non-Arabs were able to read the letters perfectly fine without any issues. So what he did is he sent each mushaf to each capital city of Islam, and he sent a qualified qari or reciter with each copy to make sure that not only were they reading it correctly, but they were reciting their letters correctly as well. And as a result, all the other masahif were burnt. Why would he burn the masahif? Because think of it, it's quite controversial. Somebody burning the Quran today, oh my God, you're going to have everybody throwing a fit. Why wasn't there any historical evidence of people having an uprising? Or let's just say when the church had the Great Schism, or the whole East versus West. Burning the Bible or burning the Quran is a big deal, right? Why would you burn the Masahif? Or the old ones, at least.
To leave no room for any misrepresentation.
Yes, Jazakallah khair. That's perfectly it. So it was a quality control measure. And as it was said, this was done in the consensus of all the Sahaba. Sayyidina Ali specifically said as well, it's like this wasn't done on his ijtihad or intelligence. This was done on our consent. And when we look at it, even from a non-Muslim perspective, there wasn't anything criticizing that act. In fact, there wasn't even any uprising that took place. What that means is if historically non-Muslims are saying there was still peace, general peace at that time, these people that go around right now telling you or claiming to be Muslims that the Quran's been fabricated are complete lies, because they can't even find a single shred of archaeological evidence, whether it be the old manuscripts or whether it be it an oral tradition. So, because subhanAllah, burning the masahif is a big event when you think about it. But the fact the Sahaba agreed upon it, as mashallah Brother Aswar pointed out, was done out of, obviously, common sense. Because they didn't want to leave room for error. And subhanAllah, it's not like they made things up. If there's a spelling mistake, to this day, I've been to the printing and Quran press in Saudi Arabia. When you go to Medina, even when there's printer mistakes, they still take these copies today, they burn them and bury them in a respectful place. There's nothing wrong with burning it, as long as you know what you're doing with it. And let's go next page, just to show you what it looked like. So this is a comparison side by side. You're looking at the contemporary Arabic script. Contemporary meaning this is what we use today, an Arabic keyboard. When you look at the Uthmani and the Arabic script, notice that ilayka and ulaik is very similar. Because, as we know, what the Uthmani and the Abu Bakr script had at that time, the time of Abu Bakr and Uthman, 30-year difference roughly, the script was basically the same. So they still didn't use dots. So he specifically put these things in place that actually make it easier for the Qari to differentiate for words that are very similar. So I hope I've visually represented, to this day, Uthmani script is still being used, mashallah. This is like genius level. You pick up any old English manuscript right now, let's just say Beowulf or even early Old English. You're not even gonna, Old and Middle English changes between themselves. And that's English in itself. I'm comparing English against English. Mashallah, we're still using something that's like pre-Dark Ages compared to Europe. There was some serious intelligence behind this, mashallah. And mashallah, the fact that you can get somebody who can think thousands of years in advance, mashallah, to me is a miracle in itself. I just thought I'd give you this representation of what it looks like. So this is just roughly how it happened at the time of the Sahaba before we move on to Sayyidina Ali. Any questions about the Abu Bakr and Ali era at this stage? Abu Bakr and Uthman, sorry. All good? Okay, inshallah. What I'll do right now in this case, I'll get Brother Muhammad. I'll get you Brother Musa continue from page 232. And then obviously I'll interject accordingly. So just read the whole of page 232 to kind of explain where we're at. So now we're talking about the era of Sayyidina Ali.
Bismillah. So signs, stages of the development of writing and vowelizing the Holy Quran. The glorious Quran was written at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, free of dotting, vowelization, and hamzas in accordance with the Arabs' customs in writing at that time. There was not a problem for them as it was their own language and they were its experts, speaking it and reading it customarily and instinctively. So the dots of passing, with the spread of Islam all over the earth and foreigners embracing it and mingling with the Arabs, mistakes in the Arabic language began to appear, which caused scholars to set signs for passing so people could adopt them. Thus, Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali undertook the task of dotting the Holy Quran in accordance with passing. He made the signs of fatha, a red dot above the letter with a fatha, and the sign of dhamma, a red dot in front of the letter with a dhamma, and the sign of kasra, a red dot below the letter with a kasra. As for the letter with tanween, he dotted it with 2 dots.
Oh, good. So basically, I'll just get read the bubble thing in the book.
In this book, in his book, Al-Muhkam fil Naqd al-Masahif, Imam Abu Amr al-Dani said, Abu al-Aswad chose a man from the tribe of Abdul Qais and said to him, take the copy of the Quran and a dye which contrasts the color of the ink. When I open my lips, put 1 dot above the letter. When I circle them, put the dot beside the letter. When I lower them, put the dot beneath it. And when I follow any of these harakas with a gunna, i.e. tanween, put 2 dots. Then he started this process until he completed it.
So alhamdulillah, it's pretty straightforward. So basically, at the time of Sayyidina Ali, obviously, mashallah, the contributions put by Sayyidina Uthman were pretty good. Sayyidina Ali, there were still some mistakes. Abu Aswad al-Du'ali himself, he thought, you know what, I'm not going to have anything to do with this. And I think as he was walking past, he heard somebody recite Surah At-Tawbah, and it was completely incorrect. He said, you know what, I've changed my mind. And mashallah, he actually had a competition. So he actually had a write-off to see who was the best person, because that's how you do it with writing the Quran. You don't, unfortunately, excuse my language, you don't get any drop kick to write the miracle of Allah. So he actually got the best person, and that's when he told him, look at my lips, and invent the system. So that's when he invented harakat. Specifically, the harakat came before the dots. I'm just letting people know. It's not the dots that came, it's the harakat. And it can be quite difficult. Is it, again, this is talking qira'at, I'm talking shu'ba and hafs. ليس البر أن بسم الله ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب. Another recitation. ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب. Here, bir is bir. We know what it means. But depending on the haraka, it basically says bir is good. Obviously, good isn't about which direction you look at in the qibla. ولكن البر من آمن. But if I change it with a dhamma or a fatha, it could mean something different, which means actually, and which is correct, by the way, you guys have no good at all anyway, or no understanding of the concepts of good. But mashallah, to understand that, we needed to have a system that specifically tied down the rules to each letter, depending on which style. So mashallah was another added thing that was introduced to make things easier. So before they became harakat or accent marks, with the stripes on the bottom and the top and the shadda and everything, there were dots at the bottom, at the top, and on the left. Then, as you can see in the diagram over here, between 3 and 4, they changed. They became fully fledged harakat. The reason why I say this is that if you find any old manuscripts that were specifically, this one here is written in specifically what we call Kufi font, or Khat al-Kufi. Kufa is somewhere in Iraq. It has a distinct, unique look about it. And mashallah, as you can see, not only can you tell the region by the text, but it also shows you how it transformed over time. So if it had the dots at the bottom of the top, it's written around that era. If it had harakat, then it came later. So that's how it evolved over time. Just to kind of differentiate between the dots. Because think of it this way, when dotting came, you can't have dots representing harakat or accents and dots representing letters. So something had to change. But at least you know at which era it came specifically, if you're looking at old manuscripts from the museum. So yes, this was done. Abu Aswad al-Du'ali was the first person to introduce harakat. And specifically, we're going to skip page 233 and 234. I'm going to give you a summary of it. It's pretty straightforward. The person so Abu Aswad al-Du'ali did this effort at 54 Hijri, around that time. Now we're talking 90 Hijri, which is 708 AD. The first person to introduce dots after harakat to actually differentiate letters was Nasr ibn Asim. This system still remains to this date. The reason why it was done is how can you tell the difference between a ba, a ta, and a tha? They all look exactly the same. If you use the dot system, ba, ta, tha still has one dot on top of each. So he added the last layer of complexity to say, look, this is the last thing we're going to introduce to make the sifa of the letter look different. So we have, let's just say, a letter in Arabic, in its basic form, it can have an open sound like a fatha, a broken plural sound, which is a kasra, or a dhamma, which is a closed one. So like for a, in the Arabic alphabet, it sounds like a, u, i, or ba, bu, bi. But the ba looks like the ta and the tha. So what he did in this case is for a ba, he put a dot at the bottom. For a ta, he put 2 dots on the top. For the tha, he did 3 on the top. And that's, from my limited understanding, where harakat had to change so that they weren't confused with the dots. So the old dots became changed into new symbols, and the dots remain to this date. So that's basically it. Any questions so far?
I always thought that Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali was the one who did the dotting, but I was always wrong by the sound.
Well, you're correct. He did the dotting, but dots meant different things in different eras.
Yeah, but not the dots for the letters. It's just the dots for the harakat, isn't it?
Yeah, specifically. So it's I mean, I was surprised when I found this out, but when you look at the dates, you know, with Asim came what at 90. That's at least 50, I don't know, 40 years later.
Yeah.
So the Du'li was there. So obviously, somebody can correct me with this. I'm more than happy to get this book first. Then the dots came later. As you can probably tell from a trained Arab's perspective, and you know, having grown up in the Middle East, harakat are harder to get than the dots, if you know what I mean. Well, how do you see it? Like, is it easier for you to remember the dots or remember the harakat?
Um, dots possibly, yeah.
Yeah, because dots, they're letter specific.
Yeah.
Harakat or accents, they change depending on the context or where the word is in the sentence.
Yeah.
So that's obviously, I'm not saying I'm using common sense, but you know, this is where mashallah, you know, and that's why people say is like, oh, I want to learn Quran, but I don't want to learn Arabic. Because like, well, how could you differentiate between both? But if you're going to do this as a profession, there is no excuse. You have to learn Arabic. Actually, brother Asar, can you go back to that photo with actually the one with the next page? Oh, sorry, the one. Go back a bit. Oh yeah, go back one more time. Okay, so there is something different about this era. Go down, and yeah. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, perfect. So here, he accurate as well. This is 90 Hijri. So that brother wants to continue
The
that page.
distinguishing dots. Examples of Nasr ibn al-Asim's vowelization of the letters of Yunfiqu, which the scholars of the Western region used to practice. Examples of the developed vowelization of the letters of Yunfiqu, which the scholars of the Eastern region used to practice.
So let's go back one page, brother Asar. So basically, there was one key difference that happened. When we're talking about East versus West at that time, West referred to specifically the Arab Peninsula. We're talking Saudi Arabia, Palestine region, maybe parts of Egypt, the Gulf as it stands. And Eastern refers specifically to the time of, we're talking Al-Maghrib. We're talking North Africa, Tunisia, onwards to the left. They had a specifically different writing style. So at that time, what was different were the letters Fa and Qa.
Sorry, Sheikh.
So,
sorry, would it
yeah.
be the opposite way again? Was the West Maghrib and the East Hijaz Palestine, or no?
Astaghfirullah Azim. Sorry, I'm getting that. If it makes you feel better, I'd still get it wrong sometimes, left or right. Yes, so West is Maghrib. East is basically the Arab Peninsula. So there was two styles of handwriting. If we go back a slide, I can show you what the Eastern one looks like. For those that aren't familiar, it's still, I'll go back a slide, sorry. It still exists to this day. So what he did, yes, that's the one. So this is the Maghreb style. You might still find this in central parts of Africa. We're talking Mali, Senegal, even parts of Morocco. Now, what's different about this one is the Fa, or Fa, was actually written with a dot underneath. And Qa was written with a dot on the top. What also Asim did is he added the dots to the letters Ya and Noon to differentiate the difference between, you know, like for example, N or A. You know, these didn't have dots. So he did that so people didn't get confused when they're reading it. But the notable difference to this day is if you pick up a Maghribi style Mus'haf, the Fa and the Qaf are still written the same to this day. So what happened, that still is valid. not because the Mus'haf looks different. Oh my God, the Quran is different. It's because they still read it as a qa and a fa. It's just written differently. Likewise, what's Eastern to you folks is known as the classical Arabic Mus'haf because it's been written that way. So that's why it got called, the green Mus'haf they have today. If you pick it up from Medina Munawwara, same thing, same concept. So that's the notable difference of things that were made at that era. And this is still there to this day. If you go 2 slides after, so I showed you what the Maghribi one looks like. Kafirin. Yeah, one more. So that's the Moroccan one. This is the one from our style. So here, this is written in the classical Uthmani font. Uthmani here specifically is not the letter Uthmani. We're talking from the Ottoman Caliphate. So it's known as Thuluth font. It's actually Turkic handwriting, but subhanAllah, it's actually done, based on the same old Arabic rules. So that's the main difference you can tell. It's like today, the most famous one is the one that you read today is the one based on the Eastern style, for lack of a better word. So that's basically that part. What else was I going to do? We'll continue on in this case. I'll get you, brother, to carry on the development of the dotting of the letter Shin.
The development of the dotting of the letter Shin. The letter Shin was distinguished from Sin by putting a point above each of its teeth or lines. Then calligraphers developed the 3 points to their pyramidal form as we see them today.
Okay, so let's have a fun exercise now. I'm getting sick and tired of me talking too fast. What does this, now based on experience I just gave you right now and the rules that I presented to you, what does this word mean to you if you had to go back 1,000 years?
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back with us. So yeah, we're going to try to guess that word. Yes, it is Sheen. We know it's Sheen, but what word is it? Try to guess what it is.
No. Don't know.
So it's got a Sheen, and it's got a tanween. I'm doing this for my students now. I'm cornering you guys. So it's got a Sheen in the middle. It's got a tanween at the end. How many words keep popping out like that? They have an in at the end and a Sheen in the middle.
Is there 3 letters here or 2?
3 letters. Because bish, think of a bat. A dot at the bottom represents a bat, right?
Hmm.
So I'll make it easier for you guys. But mashallah, there is a reason, there's some wisdom behind what I've just done. This is bishay'in. You see what I mean?
Hmm.
So here, when you look at the dotted system, there is a tanween at the end. I could be wrong. Somebody feel free to correct me. But you got 1 dot for the first letter at the bottom. It's a ba, it's a sha, and a ya. And it finishes at a tanween. So for al-Arab al-Aqha, as we call them, or like original Arabs, they'll pick it up as bishay'in, which leads us to a problem that you guys just experienced. Where is the Hamza? You see where I'm coming from?
Exactly.
And that leads us to page 236, inshallah.
So the development of writing the letter Kaf, is that what you're after, Ustath?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so the letter Kaf, whether alone or at the end of a word, was distinguished from Lam by its shape. However, it was developed with the development of the Arabic script until it became similar to Lam. Therefore, it was given distinction by putting a small trigger-like kaf inside it, which changed by calligraphers over time into a form similar to a hamza.
Yes. So basically, the old calf looked like an lamb. Obviously, there was a request to kind of modify it so that we differentiate the lamb from the calf. The change in that era, there was actually more emphasis to not only work on the calligraphy of the letters, but visually represent each letter with a distinct sound. So obviously, they can't look similar and sound very similar or exact. There was emphasis put to actually differentiate it even further to help people understand, like, this is a ka instead of a fa. Now, when you look at the ka on its own, obviously, they had to get the calligraphy right. As you can see on the bottom right-hand photo, the ka on the blue circle looks very similar to a. So obviously, this leads us to the next section, writing the hamza between the old and the modern dictation.
The hamza had no image in script for the Arabs. Rather, they treated it as follows. One, at the beginning of the word, they wrote it as an alif. And there's some examples here.
Yeah, so I've left the best to last. This is basically the last little addition before we talked about harakat. For Hamzat, and the Arabs here amongst me can correct me, this was a really big headache for the Arabs. And some people didn't pronounce it, and some people, they pronounced it with ease. And the Uthmani script intentionally left out the issue of Hamzat because some styles had them, some styles didn't. That's why we always refer back to the mother font, as we call it, which is the Uthmani font. So to give you an example, like and then there's not as clearly, but it's still there, like and then there is completely misses all. Examples you can relate to this is, for example, either. That's pronounced tahqiq, every single is said. And you got tasheel, for those who've done Hafs and Asim with me, you don't say jami, you say jami. You see how I intentionally made it softer for the last one? That's what tasheel means. And then you got completely ignore it. And as we know with Warsh, mashallah, he says it as yu'minun. Don't say yu'minun. Now, the interesting part is the same thing happens in English. Can somebody give me an example in English from the English speakers here? No native English people? Or at least lived in the West for 30 years or 20 years?
Are you talking about apostrophes?
Well, not necessarily apostrophes, but I mean examples where you would say a letter or intentionally pronounce it softly or miss it completely.
Like phone, like silent letters.
Oh. I mean, I'll give you a simple one. You got bottle, right?
Hmm.
So you got English versus, well, I'm not saying English, but we're talking UK Commonwealth versus, let's just say, American English. You got bottle, and then you got bottle. And then you got, I don't know, some variants where they say, I don't know, bottle. And they completely skip it altogether. So it happens in English. I'm just trying to say it happens, the same thing applies to Arabic, and this is specifically with the Hamza. So I hope at least that gives an example. But without any further ado, I'll actually get you to read that section, Brother Musa, 237.
So writing the hamza between the old and modern dictation, two, in the middle of a word or its end, they used to write it as an alif, waw, or ya, or just admit it. It is the hamza that we write on the line in the modern dictation.
Okay, we'll do the next one.
So innovating a shape for the hamza, Al-Khalil ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi invented a shape for the hamza in the script. It is the head of the letter ain because of the closeness of the articulation points of the two letters. In his poem, Resource for the Thirsty about the writing and vowelization of the Quran, the scholar Muhammad al-Kharraz al-Sharashi Asharishi said, the letter Ain was distinguished for they have both the same intensity and nearness of their articulation points. That's why trusted men, both authors and linguists, wrote it the same as the letter Ain.
Yeah, so basically, Hamza is basically Ain cut in half. It came at 175 year Hijri, so it came way later. So probably add another, I don't know, 100 or so years, or just under 100 years after Asim, who dotted the letters, because of its complexity and understanding the rules of pronunciation. So, but obviously it had to be introduced because not only does it give a headache for the Arabs, it gives a headache for the non-Arabs as well. So it had to be introduced to the script to differentiate it between different alifs. That was basically the last thing that was introduced, apart from, like, you know, after that era, in my humble opinion, let's just say roughly around 200 Hijri, 200 years after the migration of Rasul, what we started doing from there onwards is just modifying the font, apart from harakat and whatnot. So it was basically, in my humble opinion, that was the end of one era, at least, of major changes. Any questions about that era, what we've covered so far? Things are pretty clear about the time of Abu Bakr, the time of Uthman, time of the Tabi'een and what they did.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, that's perfect. Alrighty, bro, I'll get you to do the 238.
So that's the stages of development of writing the itbaq letters?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so the 4 itbaq letters or adhesion letters were written similar to one another in script when they were connected to the following letter. So differentiation among them was realized by natural disposition and the context. Then distinction was made between the sad and the dad on one hand and between the ta and the va on the other hand by making the line of the ta and the va longer. After that, distinction was made among the 4 letters by dotting the letters.
Sweet. That, mashallah, this page demonstrates it quite, you know, it's quite straightforward, but mashallah, you know, you're not looking at things that look very similar. Like, as time progressed, more additions were made, not additions to the Quran, but additions to the font and the calligraphy to make it stand out clearer so that people were able to articulate in a better format. We'll go and move on, inshallah, developing the shapes. I'll probably try to, anybody else wants to read the next section? I could probably read it myself.
Oh, sorry, I'll start my...
Oh, no, it's all right, bro. Oh, yeah, go for it, bro.
Al-Khalid ibn Ahmed al-Farhidi, who died 175 after Hijri, developed the dotting of Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali and made the sign of the fatha and alif lying down above the letter, which has a fatha, and the sign of the dhamma, a small waw above the letter, which has a dhamma. Al-Khalil made the sign of the kasra, a small ya, pushed back under the letter with a kasra. Its upper part vanished with the passage of time and its lower part remained. And he doubled the haraka to indicate tanween. In his poem, Resource for the Thirsty, about the writing and vowelization of the Quran, the scholar Muhammad Kharraz al-Sharishi said, above it, a fatha, which is a small alif lying down, and a dhamma, like a waw, which lies before it or above, and a kasra under it as a dropped ya afterwards. If you follow it by a tanween, add to it the like of it for clarification.
So inshallah, while we wait for the next slide to go into the mystery what we're talking about, basically, Khalid ibn Ahmad had a really good contribution about actually transforming the harakat. So he's the one that actually helped put the passing, let's just say, signs in the state that we have today. So to present an open sound, he basically had a stripe, a vertical stripe, let's call it, or strike, on the top of the letter. Same thing with the kasra. With the kasra, unfortunately, he put it underneath to pronounce the broken plural. And same thing with the dhamma, but he did it in a closed form. So that's how you get the a, u, e sound. So by putting one of each, the stripe on the top, you get an open sound. The dhamma on the top, you get a closed sound, u. And for the kasra at the bottom, you get the broken plural, which is e. And again, if you add 2 of each, it means it's tanween. So you say it as an, un, in. That's basically it. And mashallah, it's a simple set of rules. It's easy to remember. For those aren't familiar with Arabic, it's still with us here to this date. Mashallah, we haven't found a better system to replace it. Anyways, we'll move on. Next slide. I'll get you carry on, brother, with the clarified tanween.
The clarified tanween. Some scribes of the Quranic copies used a small noon above the letter to indicate tanween, indicating the clarification of the tanween rafi'. This noon was put inverted above the dhamma in this way.
All good. And the symbols of sukoon.
The symbol for sukoon. Al-Khalil also invented a symbol for the sukoon. It is, as pictured, the upper part of the letter kha without a dot, which he derived from the word khafif, i.e. light. In his book, Al-Muhkam fil Naqd al-Masahif, Imam Abu Amr ad-Dani said, and the experts in Arabic, such as Sibawayh and most of his companions, make its symbol the letter kha, alluding thereby to the word khafif, light. The general method of the scholars of the Western region was to make the symbol of the sukoon a hollow circle, which was taken from the last part of the word jazm.
Yeah.
In his
so basically, oh, sorry. So for those that aren't familiar with this, the sukoon and the jazm and whatnot, this is the silent rule. So, you know, rather than saying ana, you say ana. Or like, you know, as we talked about bah will be. But if I put a sukoon on it, it sounds like ab. I'm actually making it silent intentionally. That one, which is khafif, and it looks like an open circle. It's like a semicircle or that's about to close. And there is jazm, which is a complete circle. I'll let you continue, bro.
In his poem, the scholar Muhammad al-Kharraz, he said, a circle is the sign of the sukoon above it, and for stress, the letter sheen.
Sweet. And now we'll get to the last ones, inshallah. We'll just I'll get you to read page 241 and 242. Go next slide.
So Al-Khalil also invented a symbol for the stressed letter, or the shadda, which is the upper part of the letter sheen, which he derived from the word shadid, intense. In his book, Imam ad-Dani said, according to this school of thought, the symbol of stress is the letter sheen because the beginning of the word shadid is intended by it, and this is the school of thought of Al-Khalil, Sibawayh, and most of their companions. The symbol of the linking Hamza, Hamza til Wasl, Al-Khalil also made the symbol of the linking Hamza, the upper part of a small sod, which is put above the linking alif, derived from the beginning of the word sila. In his book, Imam ad-Dani said, and the experts in dotting call this symbol linking, because the words before this alif, which it symbolizes, are linked to what follows, so they can't connect while the alif disappears from pronunciations thereby.
Yeah, pretty much. So you've got like man istata, for example. Man istata. So obviously he made it, that's when he kind of denoted the linking letter. I don't have it here on the slideshow. And obviously the shadda, the one that you've seen, it's like got teeth. It's not like the letter sheen, not to be confused with it. When you say the word ash, it denotes stress of a letter. It's kind of like having two of each. And just for your guys' information, Khalil and Ahmed Farahidi, and you know, you've heard Sibawayh and all these grammarians, just to make it easier for you guys, these people weren't Arabs at all. Like Sibawayh, mashallah, the famous Arab grammarian, died at the age of 30. He set out all the rules for Arabic grammar. That guy did not come from the Arab Peninsula or spoke Arabic. Well, he didn't come from a region that spoke Arabic, actually. But the rules that we have today, you can say, were, and the Qur'an and the Kutab actually contributed them were non-Arabs to kind of show that, look, this is a collective effort done by the Muslim Ummah, not specifically for native Arabs. If Arabs don't pick up their game, somebody from Persia will, mashallah, as it happened with Sibawayh. Now, we're getting near the end of this now with the symbols. We'll talk about the mad symbol, 242. Yep. Yeah, go ahead, bro.
I'm sorry, I just want to make just one comment, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Oh, tfadda.
I'm just looking at this stages of, you know, the development of the Arabic font. It's staggering to know, you know, how this happened actually. I mean, when Sayyidina Usman decided to make those 5 or 7 copies, he banned all of the other copies to eliminate any confusion that might happen. But these scholars, and he obviously he was the Khalifa of all Muslims. You know, he had the authority to do that. These scholars over time, they did, you know, they added their own additions and obviously development of the font. They had no authority as such to make people follow these, right? And there would have been other people, I would think, you know, making their own ijtihad as well. It's just quite astonishing to see how, you know, what they've done back then actually managed to trickle through right to our age now, and actually made the font that we see these days. And obviously there will be other, like say he wouldn't say make the sukun symbol or the kasra, and then the next day everybody will follow that, you know, because the obvious technology wasn't, you know, basically spreading this information to everybody around. It wasn't that, didn't happen that quickly. So I just thinking about that is subhanallah, that's the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be, obviously.
Yes, subhanallah.
And all these developments happened, and obviously there would have been other people thought of, you know, their own way of developing the font as well, but these guys had you know, prevailed, and what they thought of actually is what we are actually reading at the moment.
Yeah, subhanallah.
Quite amazing.
I know what you mean, subhanallah. Like when you think about it, I mean, specifically what comes to mind is what happened when, you know, the Bible was written down when the church was there. Obviously, every person you talk to, they're going to say, "Oh, don't talk about the King James version, or, you know, the New English translation, or, you know, whatever version it is specifically." And when you think about it, as that happens with previous nations, the more time went, the more editions of versions were being made, and the more they deviated and they split from one another. But subhanAllah, as you can see here, there is archaeological evidence for additions that have been specifically put in place, calculated. And when I say the science of writing this down, is if you go anywhere, whether it's in Morocco, in the middle of Central Africa, where there's still some places still writing on tablets, or you go over in Persia or, you know, southern Russia, they'll still use the exact same system. That's what we call a science. You know, when you study a degree in Islamic sciences, it means what applies here applies to any part of the world. This is not open for interpretation. It's a hard science, and it can be recreated, just like how you have a scientific experiment and all that. And mashallah, the fact that as the years went past, they kept adding to it and coming together. Not only did the Muslim population, you know, Islam is the fastest growing religion, there was more consensus now than there ever was that this is the correct way of writing the Quran, and there is no disagreement. And mashallah, if this isn't a miracle, I don't know what it is, to be honest. You know, like, because there have been so many situations. This happened, by the way, mashallah, when you look at it, the time as well. Not only was the empire expanding at an exponential rate, there was major wars happening in different parts of the empire. Anything could have interrupted it. So mashallah, in order to maintain that cohesion, and not only to write it down, but also have people that are memorizing the Quran cover to cover by heart. And example we have now is in New Zealand, on the edge of the earth, where there's a national ijaza program, is a testament to the everlasting miracle they're supposed to be. You know, and subhanAllah, writing is just one form with regards to it. Anybody had any questions? Mashallah, was actually some really good insight by Brother Muhammad.
I think we need another session for Q&A.
Don't worry, man. I'm definitely saving one up, man. Like, we're definitely going to have a huge catch up after this. I'll just finish off maybe on the madda and the verbally omitted, just to show you, like, at least the last symbol. We're nearly finished the symbols. So mad, you've probably seen this on a lot of the masahif. It was actually written as mad on the left-hand corner, which means to extend. Example for those that aren't familiar, like ulaik would be written as, say ulaik. So mad was written to extend. Over time, as you're aware, it became maybe quite cumbersome. Calligraphy changed. They kind of cut the meme off and they added that eyebrow licking thing on the right. And that's what it looks like today. So I'm showing you the old and the new form as a change over time. So I'll just get you to finish off, brother, on page 242.
So the symbol for the mud that exceeds the natural mud, Al-Khalil also made a symbol for the mud, which is the word mada. With the passage of time, it changed into the current shape of the elongation. And the symbol for the letter which is written but verbally omitted. In his book, Al-Muhkam fil Naqd al-Masahif, Imam al-Dani said, you should know that the daughters of the predecessors of Al-Madinah, as well as those of our town, conventionally put a little red circle on the letters which are extra in writing and null in pronunciation. Then he gave for it the following examples. Mi'a, ulu. Then he said, and this circle which is put on the extra letters is the nice zero, which those specialized in calculation put for the null number to indicate its absence because of the non-existence of the extra letter in pronunciation.
So, mashallah, when you look at the word here, when it translates to it in English, when he's recited, it said basically calculated, mashallah. We're looking at words, keywords, the science, calculated. I mean, for those who don't know, Abu Ahmad Dani, mashallah, he's actually the predecessor to the Imam Shatibi, who came at 500, roughly 40-ish, around 500 years after Hijrah. So he actually came before that. So let's just say around that time, hundreds, well, at least maybe 300 to 400 years after Rasulullah passed away, people are still using specific keywords like calculate and science. That's why I tell people is like, as mashallah has been said by Imam Waqi' ibn Jarrah, if I'm correct, he basically said, we didn't take knowledge from anybody. He said, when we used to turn up and sit next to that person, i.e. the teacher, and see how he teaches people for at least a month before we said, this guy is worthy of my attention. And subhanAllah, my hope is that in the future, people can actually see this knowledge and get access to it and appreciate it. They'll understand that there is actually some serious thought that's coming behind this. This is not and I've said this a lot to my students, Quran is not a after school care program where you chuck your kids in some sort of school and hope they're going to be the best practicing Muslims. Because if that's your intention, they're going to come up like that. If you actually treat it as a proper educational program with the right educators, give them the right tools and chances to excel and have the best teachers available, then you're going to get future scholars. No questions asked, And this was said to me by one teacher I personally, why is it that we're, 3 or 4 times as much money to get private tuition, or we're taking Quran easy? But I'm just hoping that at least by the end of this lecture series, if people can understand that this is a fully fledged profession, they can at least start asking the right questions, mashallah. I'll try to go to the second to last slide, brother Aswar. We'll come back to this stuff next week, inshallah. I just want to have more people jump on board and ask questions. So far, alhamdulillah, I think I've done enough talking for now. Inshallah, next lesson is going to be less intense. It's just going to be more around we'll do 10 minutes of reading just so we can finish the book. There's not going to be much at all, just so at least the Qur'an students can finish off the book. And then after that, we'll jump straight into the memorization techniques, what tools to do. If you have got competitions or kids are interested in competitions, more than happy to share these experiences with you. Any questions so far? I thought it'll make it easier for you, Brother Musa, so you don't bring it all to the last session.
Khair, alhamdulillah, it's just so much. But like here, with Uthman radiallahu anhu bringing it together in the one mushaf, they were trying to stop the differences of the wrong recitations, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so when he said, if they differ, and so those differings, are they still around? Are they the different qira'at, or should I have a question that's more aligned with what we've learned today?
No, obviously there is, as we know, there is authorized and unauthorized recitations. Unauthorized recitations come in many forms, as we already know in our lecture series. It could be something as simple as a vocal sound, not sounding, got the wrong pitch, or you're saying the wrong, let's just say, vowel sound, or passing letter, as we call it. Or it could be something as major as changing the entire characteristic of the letter or even word. So as we already know, we have a chain, or ijaza is supposed to be a chain of narration system, which basically means you have it's not a certificate, but it can be a certificate, but we're talking a document that shows every single teacher you've had back to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam from start to finish. And this happens, and you have to know them by name, and it has to go all the way back. I'm dead serious when I say this. It has to go back 1450 years, 58 years approximately. Now, if it's not on the ijaza, then it's not regarded as authentic. Because what ijaza means, it means your teacher is saying, I've heard you say the Quran from start to finish. It's exactly as it was in the Quran that was written in Uthmani font. It has no mistakes whatsoever in accordance to the rules of the Arabic language, because it makes sense to the Arabs, because the Quran was revealed in Arabic. Qur'anan Arabiyyan ghayra dhi iwaj, as it keeps repeating in different parts of the Quran. So it has to be valid with that. It has to have the correct chain, and it has to comply with the rules of Tajweed, as was stated by Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The elongation has to be perfectly calculated. Like Imam Abu Bakr Ahmad Dani, basically said in page 242 that you just read, he said it has to be calculated. Ulaik, 4 harakat long, according to the rule of Shatibiyya. You're not going to say ulaik alladhina and then just get away with it. Everything has to be meticulously given. At that time, as you're aware, and I'm giving an example of some accents, let's just say alaykum. Turkic cultures, and let's just talk about that part of the world, especially I'm talking about Azerbaijan moving forward and whatnot. You got people might say kum instead of kum. Now, kum is the proper way to say it in Arabic. But for these people there, they saw the kaf, they say, I'm saying it correctly. And my belief is that's what they're arguing about, obviously. Not to mention there's probably people that actually made other mistakes copying the Mus'haf because they didn't have a proper understanding of Arabic or the capability of writing it down properly because of spelling mistakes. So what Sayyidina Uthman, mashallah, did is standardize it for everybody so it's easy to understand. The font that he wrote as well accommodates the 7 authentic recitations at that time. As we said, and mashallah, that is a miracle in itself. How could you write in a font that accommodates 7 recitations that might have slight differences, but still maintains the Quran intact? Again, this is the word science. These guys weren't just some random guys living in tents in the desert. They had the biggest empire at that time, by the time of Umayyad Khilafah, when it started after 200 years after Rasul. This was calculated. And it was specifically calculated to accommodate the different variations of Qur'an as well. Every single haraka and dot you see there literally was calculated. And to this day, I haven't found anybody that proved it wrong. So I hope that answers your question with regards to that side.
Jazakallah khair.
Inshallah. And for those that weren't aware, obviously that this gets covered in detail when we do the one-on-one recitations, especially for the Ijaza class. We cover this when we talk about, for example, Maliki and Maliki, and, Ghayabati and Ghayabati al-Jub, because technically speaking, these recitations are still valid because they still adhere to the Uthmani script and the manuscripts that were written at the time of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, whether it's the Nabati or the Uthmani. As we said, the Uthmani script was introduced to make it easier to write for people. MashaAllah, brother Asad here, a really nice example. I've got a Mus'haf I'm looking at right now. It's a Shu'ban Mus'haf. When you're reciting it, Surah Al-Ma'idah, Muhammad. To cut a long story short, I'm just not going to detail. It's written, من الذين استحق عليهم الأولين. That's Shu'bah. But من حفص, من الذين استحق عليهم الأوليان. So you see, استحق and استحق, they're still valid, according to Uthmani font. أولياني and أولينا is still the same thing, because if we go back to the beginning of the lecture slide and I show you the Nabati font and what was written on parchment at the time of Rasul, that accommodates that recitation, because this is not a made up recitation. This was revealed by Sayyidina Jibreel. Gabriel himself came and he gave it to Rasul and said, this is the permissible way of saying it. So what people, if what you're reading has not been revealed by Jibreel himself or Rasul all the Sahaba, and the Arabs say this is not valid linguistically, this is not Quran at all, and it should not be recited as a substitute for worship. But obviously, I'm not going to get into the issue of qira'at. That's a specific field on its own. But as you can see, it doesn't conflict with the Uthmani script that we mentioned. But the question that comes up is, how could it accommodate 7 different styles that are not conflicting against one another? Like, mashallah, when we talked about arjulikum and arjulakum with Shu'ba and Hafs, they're both valid. Because as we know from a fiqh perspective, when you wash your hands and do your wudu, there are specific certain situations where obviously you have to actually wash your feet with water. But if you're a traveler and you have certain exemptions, you can wipe over your socks or whatever you're wearing, which is, mashallah, miraculous, considering the fact that, as you're aware, everything has been finally dotted and sorted in the text form that we have here today, which I'm showing in front of you in the lecture slides, 200 years after the Hijrah. Rasul passed away 10 years after, 10-year Hijri. But we're talking 190 years later, we've added these things. This is the best thing to kind of say, look, the Quran is like, completely fabricated. There's contradiction. But not only did these additions come later, they actually confirmed that the Quran is actually correct. And from the biggest evidence we have, from a fiqh perspective, when it comes to worship, our worship hasn't changed because the Quran hasn't changed. Like, mashallah, when you think about it, there's so many calculated checks and measures in place that kind of confirm, this is a true religion. Because at the end of the day, I do not have a license to get up, and everybody knows this. If I get up and I actually talk in the minbar and if I end up making a mistake, mashallah, the brothers and sisters have done this really beautifully, mashallah, even in this chat. Brother, this is not the West, this is the East. And mashallah, you guys are trained in accordance to the rules of Islam, and you have that intuition to correct somebody of my stature, regardless of what I teach you. Other religions forbid that, unfortunately. But alhamdulillah, it goes to show that this is not my religion or the elite's religion. Islam is a democratic process by which it opens up religion to the masses, and it kind of destroys the monopoly of power that the elites have when it comes to granting people certain access to power. And mashallah, just like how they did this with the Arabic script, it remains with us today with regards to everything that we do with regards to our way of life and practicing our deen and carrying on as it is. So without any talking too much right now, I hope that's kind of answered your question with regards to that.
Jazakallah kullu khair.
Ajma'in, man. Alhamdulillah. I think this is it for now. Inshallah, what I'll personally do is, for the next lesson, we'll cover, inshallah, 10 minutes worth of reading. I'll start on the right lecture slide. I'll probably show you some more manuscripts. But apart from that, I'll probably open up the floor to more questions, inshallah. Anyone's got any more questions? Alhamdulillah, that's all right. What I'll do in this situation right now is, inshallah, we'll call it an evening. Jazakumullah khair for all your attention. And obviously, this is based on the book by Dr. Ayman Swed. It's called The Illustrated Guide to Tajweed. By all means, feel free to buy it and look into the details of it. It's a really comprehensive teacher's guide. If you have any questions, feel free to ask him and, note them down and put them forward for the next lecture. Next lecture, we're going to carry on what we haven't finished today. It's not going to take too long, but it's going to be, inshallah, more of an interactive session with regards to actually getting your opinion. Give me all your problems. Fadda. Go ahead.
Sheikh, it's just philosophical question. Forgive me for that, but we don't have to answer it today. We can leave it for another.
All good.
So for the Torah, it was revealed in tablets, isn't it right?
Yes. As it says in the Quran, Al-Wah, yeah.
So it was written in those tablets.
Yes, وفي نسختها, in it, yes, it had guidance and revelation.
So why wasn't the Quran revealed in the same way, in tablets, rather than orally? I'm just, pondering on that, since you just, as you were talking about, how the stages of the writing of the Quran. It just makes me wonder, there must be a hikmah behind this wisdom.
Subhanallah, wa sallam Muhammad. Okay. This is actually a really good question you put forward. And I'll probably ask you another question with regards to that, which you probably already know the answer to. What's the difference between us and the Jews and the Christians with regards to our tradition with the Quran? What's the major difference, actually?
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken it upon himself to preserve the Quran.
Yes,
while the
that's
Jews
what it specifically
and the
states.
Christians were given that task to استحفظوا بما,
Yes,
to
exactly.
preserve the tradition.
Yes. So apart from Allah's having his ultimate protection, the judgment of looking after the Mus'haf, clearly we're a practical religion. So we don't follow just scripture and it says pray 5 times a day. Your subscription, for lack of a better word, to the faith is based on the amount of obedience you give to Allah directly. So you're saying you're Muslim, you're going to pray. That's how it works. Same thing. Just like how Allah had this revelation, I will protect this. Clearly, there has to be certain measures in place. Like, mashallah, we talked about the obvious measure, which is writing it down in scribes. Now, as you're aware, and it says it in the Quran, and that's where probably expert opinion might come with people that specialize in, you could say, biblical scriptures. Unfortunately, I don't have the sister here today, mashallah, because of the difference in time zone. But basically, she'll be able to give more insight, mashallah, with regards to how it was done. But basically, as we know in Europe, there was obviously a high rate of literacy, and people actually went to the church to kind of learn how to read and write. Now, as you're aware, a lot of people that wrote these things down had a lot of free time. A lot of them were monks. It was done by the church. Same thing with the synagogues and the Jews and the Christians. Now, obviously, what is the main difference between us and the Jews and the Christians that is relevant to this date when it comes to preserving scripture? Anyone would take a guess? Ijaza program? I'm looking at you guys. Non-Ijaza program, guys? I'm guessing, Brother Muhammad, when you look at it, is the fact that we actually memorize it.
Yeah.
So as it states, I don't know which narration it was, whether it's Israeliyat or not, it's basically talking about the nations going to come after the revelation of the Bible. And saying these people carry their Injil, their Bible in their chest. Obviously, you can say, oh yes, they love it, and you talk about metaphorical and whatnot. But the only nation that fulfills this prophecy, for lack of a better word, is Islam. No religion on this earth right now has opened this process to the masses. Islam is not. It's not like when it happens in a synagogue, they have to bring up the Torah and it's a big sacred text, and the guy reads it and then they put it back in the shelf somewhere. Every single person, and that's why we have national and international Quran competitions. Whether a young kid from Senegal in the middle of nowhere, Africa, or Southeast Asia, or the Middle East, they pronounce it to the exact same standard as it is. If for whatever reason, the establishment or the religious establishment decides to be corrupt, and I'm not blaming other religions, it happens with Islam as well, because behind closed doors, anything is open for question. But what we do, what's different about us is that it's a written and a verbally memorized oral tradition, which means if somebody goes behind closed doors, and he could be the biggest sheikh in the world, and he writes a mushaf, and he reads it incorrectly, an 8-year-old to this date, in accordance to our Sharia and our rules in Islam, an 8-year-old kid that doesn't understand Arabic can stand behind the prayer and correct the imam. You guys know this very well. I lead prayer congregations. If I make a single mistake, you as the congregation are obliged to correct me. Period. That I encourage you to sit down and see if it happens in other places. That's what's different about our tradition. It's a written, preserved tradition. As we know, it says in the Quran, fi lawh al-mahfuz. It is written there, it's sealed, it's protected in its written form. We have, mashallah, people that dedicated their life to the art, to keeping it preserved in its written form. But the Ijaza program and its equivalent, they deal with preserving it from an oral sense. And these two things together, when you think about it, are the reason why the Quran hasn't changed to this day.
That's
I
very
hope
nice.
that answers your question.
Yeah, it is actually very just Jazakallah khair, very well said.
Yeah, because the thing is, that's what I tell people. Do not. The problem comes when you look at it from one way or another. It's like when people look at you, especially Arabs, like, "Oh, why are you trying to teach me how to read?" It's like, "Yes, I am trying to teach you how to read." You know, if I'm sitting down and I tell people, "Look, in masajid, your salah will not be accepted correctly if you are making mistakes." There's nothing wrong with learning Surah Al-Fatiha, by the way. But if you intentionally choose to make mistakes in Surah Al-Fatiha and you find your prayers aren't being accepted in the day of judgment, there's a conscious choice that you took. You know, because at the end of the day, Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the reason why we're reading this book here, mashallah, 1,400 years after it was revealed, is because, mashallah, out of his generosity and his mercy, as rahmatan al-alameen, ever-ending mercy to mankind, he had the humbleness to sit down on his knees, or any position it was, in front of Sayyidina Jibreel, Gabriel, and receive that revelation word for word, letter for letter. And if he did this, the question I ask people, and this is not just New Zealand, this is across the whole world, is, are you of a better status than Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? If the answer is yes, then you've left the fold of the faith. If the answer is no, then maybe we should all start sit down and question our recitations and humble ourselves, you know, to actually getting genuine knowledge. And mashallah, it goes hand in hand. You can't learn reading correctly. You know, having it preserved in writing is one thing, but recitation is a passed down tradition as well. So I hope that answers that question, inshallah.
It does actually. Jazakallah khair. I have more appreciation of what's happening now, and when you read that verse now, نحن نزلنا الذكر أنزلنا الذكر وإنا له لحافظون. You have more understanding of it, more appreciation. I think that's the word. Jazakallah khair for your explanation.
No, Ismail, Jazakallah khair, man. I really appreciate it, bro. Alhamdulillah, it's been a really interesting discussion. I really hate having long lectures here, to be honest. But alhamdulillah, we're coming near the end of this wonderful lecture series, mashallah. Hopefully we'll have everything wrapped up by next week. Inshallah, my best advice, because I'm aware of the time as well, I don't want to overburden everybody. Inshallah, next week, we'll just read for 10 minutes straight. We'll finish off what we're doing, and we'll start talking practical tips, memorization techniques, or Quran recitation routines. What things you can do to kind of help you out. Yes, there's going to be a little bit of secret sauce involved with regards to like techniques that work and techniques that don't work, the myths and the facts. So it's going to be quite interactive. If you also have any questions about this lecture, I specifically advise you to, if you can't make it this lecture as well, it's being recorded to YouTube, by all means, rewatch it, write down notes, bring in, we'll answer them at the beginning of class. Inshallah, that way we can jump straight into the program. So inshallah, I do apologize for going slightly over time. There's been a really nice interactive discussion. Inshallah, I'll leave you folks with it for the time being. And yeah, Jazakumullah khair for Tajweed Club for hosting this initiative. Inshallah, may Allah put a lot of barakah and reward in your efforts, inshallah. Inshallah, I'll leave leave you to think about it, inshallah. And we'll meet next week, inshallah, same time. Subhanakallah wa hamdik, la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Take care, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum.